Good afternoon and welcome back to Cybersecurity Digital 2019. My name is Sally Fletcher. I'm the Head of Online Events for ITPC Digital, and I'm delighted to be co-hosting this event along with my colleague Alaris, the editor for the Cybersecurity Hub. So next up, we've got a topic that I was really keen to have covered in this conference because so many people ask for it, and that's IoT. This is going to be focusing on the insecurity of things, so why IoT is a threat you can't ignore. I'm not going to go over the console again because a lot of you from the last session are still dialed in. So, but just to let you know, you've got the bio of your speaker on the right-hand side. You've also got the Q&A box to the left-hand side so that you can put your questions in there and make sure that you ask your questions of Ryan. He's here live to answer them. So really make the most of having his expertise. You'll also see there's a digital gift bag, which has some great information in there from the sponsors, from the Cybersecurity Hub, as well as the slides from this presentation. So you can only download that while the presentation is going on, so make sure you do that as soon as possible. If you have any technical problems, you can also post that in the Q&A. Me and Jody, my colleague at the Cybersecurity Hub, will get right back to you. So I'm going to introduce our speaker, Ryan Castle, who's the Chief Operations Officer for TraceSecurity, with a background in software development, with a background in software development and law enforcement. Ryan's focus is on the technical side of the business. Ryan currently oversees customer success, development, IT support, and product management. So it's a wonder he's got time to present today. Prior to his current role, Ryan was Director of Product Management and Vice President of Technology at TraceSecurity, and previously worked for Palantir Technology and as a special agent in the FBI. It's very impressive. I'm going to hand over to Ryan to lead us in our next presentation. Over to you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. The topic today is IoT, or as we kind of call it internally, the insecurity of things. Quick overview and summary of what I want to cover today is, one, just a quick definition of what is IoT and kind of how we define it internally and how I sort of think about it when discussing this topic from a security perspective. Two different sort of looks at IoT from security management. Really, in one way, it is all very similar to what most of us are already doing from a security standpoint, and we don't need to overthink it. It looks a lot like existing security practices are out there, and no reason to reinvent the wheel. On the other hand, IoT devices are actually look very different and have some other things that make them different from a security management standpoint. So it's kind of an interesting topic, particularly as it relates to security. Go over a little bit of why they're everywhere and how we make these decisions to deploy these devices in our networks. And really, what is the problem with having these things? And lastly, some pointers and kind of recommendations to what to do if you're thinking about deploying these devices, either at your home or business, and how to plan for them, or if you already have them deployed, how to go about addressing them from a security standpoint. So first, just for some definitions here, IoT, what is it? Obviously, the common definition is Internet of Things. I think of it as kind of a non-standard computing device with connectivity to either the capital I Internet or just to any sort of network, maybe to a LAN or local network. Some of the things that fall into this category that we commonly see are various kinds of sensors. Can be temperature sensors, can be heart rate monitors, maybe it's a wearable device, or something in like an industrial manufacturing plant. We see a ton of these in household devices and smart home equipment, so Amazon Alexa and Google Home, Nest thermostats. There's any number of household devices, kind of smart home type things that you may have in your home. Another one that's been around for a long time is printers. Printers have certainly fall into this category. Certainly, have been around for a long time. They've been networked, but using this definition, printers certainly fall into what we call an IoT and viewed as sort of from a security standpoint, similar to how you manage IoT devices. So first of all, from a security perspective, why is this all the same? IoT security is effectively the same as the security you have for the rest of your network. There's not a whole lot to overthink and do here besides what you're already doing. From a security standpoint, taking a step back here, it's really all about protecting data, protecting sensitive information. And when we think about the timeline of what we've done here is, before computers, we had physical storage of files. You had a physical file, and it was kept in a filing cabinet, preferably locked in a certain location in your office. This was very convenient from a security perspective in the sense that someone had to gain physical access to your location. They had to gain physical access to a file folder. You had someone, an office manager, or somebody sitting there that prevented people from getting in here. And there's only a single place for it to be accessed. So made things much easier to manage and secure. With the advent of electronic storage, kind of the next phase ends up being an on-premise type solution where now maybe you had several workstations where this file was stored electronically as opposed to physically. You still had some physical limitation in that you had to be at the actual office and you had to have access to a workstation. We've kind of reached this third stage where a lot more people are using cloud storage and things are not necessarily on-premise. Additional layer of convenience, right? So you have the ability to access your work from home, from the library, from your mobile device, from iPad, or from the office as well. And so really IoT is just kind of like more computers and more ways to access this thing. So what we look at it from a security standpoint is that you just have more entry points to this data. So whereas before you had a physical file sitting in a single location, you could pretty well control that access to now. With the prevalence of IoT, you have all kinds of potential entry points to get it to this data. So as we've added this convenience, we've added more entry points, and that's more why this looks the same. We're just adding more computers, more access points to data, so you have to protect that data and manage the systems that have access to it. So with that being said, why is IoT treated differently, and why do we kind of talk about it differently from a security standpoint? For one, IoT devices present very new and different challenges from those that we have historically faced in dealing with traditional devices. And really, when you think about traditional computers, where you typically think about something that looks kind of like a workstation. If you think about a file server, a desktop, maybe you have a kiosk at your front desk for logging people in and out as visitors. Maybe your remote employees have laptops that they use for writing code remotely. All these things tend to look like what we call a quote computer, right? You're all running one of three major operating systems: keyboard, video, mouse. So we just think of them as computers, and we've kind of learned to think of those as devices that need to be patched, that are threats, where we scan them for vulnerabilities. We have a patch schedule. We have training for usage on them. We spend a lot of time focused on these because we've just been trained to treat them like a quote computer and realize them as security threats. IoT is different because these devices, for one, tend to be very purpose-driven, right? Your file server and a desktop, all those are just computers. They're very general purpose. We use them for very different needs, whereas IoT devices tend to be incredibly purpose-driven. Additionally, many of these devices tend to be new to connectivity. So you may have had, coffee makers and thermostats that have always done what they did, but now we're trying to connect them to data networks. And so because of that, they don't necessarily have the same infrastructure and systems built in that are that your legacy computers do. Another unique component about IoT devices is that they're embedded. Operating systems are embedded, and they're commonly run proprietary software. So from a patching and maintenance standpoint, you can't necessarily use the same tools and infrastructure you already have to manage these systems. So it's going to be totally different operating systems, totally different software in many cases. They also tend to have longer lifespans. So these things tend to sit around on networks a lot longer than traditional workstations. Most IT departments are rotating out workstations every 5+ years because they get older, they get slow. Many of these devices and sensors can stay on networks for much, much longer, which makes them easier to forget. And going along with the fact that they're embedded and run proprietary software, security patching for these can be a problem. They may not be part of your regular patching schedule. Again, they probably fall outside of the typical patching systems you have for patching your workstations. And so these things can kind of fall by the wayside. Ultimately, we're just kind of not conditioned to view them as, quote, computers or as threats. You don't walk by your coffee maker and think, oh man, I need to make sure this thing is patched, right? Thermostat, heart rate monitor, all of these things. We don't think of it as something that can be, quote, hacked. And so they tend to be treated a little bit differently, and we don't worry too much about patching them and vulnerability scanning them the way we do for our traditional computers and devices. So from a security management standpoint, part of it is training not only ourselves, but our users and other people, that we really focus a lot of security training and security focus on thinking about computers as just your workstation. And this also applies to all of these many devices that you have deployed throughout your network. So because of this, why are these things everywhere? Why have they become so prevalent? It seems like they have somewhat popped up overnight, and they're appearing everywhere. Namely, in looking at it from a high level, it falls down to convenience and efficiency. And what it seems to be the case is that convenience and security always seem to be inversely proportional. A few examples of this that we encounter in our practice is, for one, is if you look at real estate closings. Real estate closings, prior to the advent of a lot of this technology, required you to be physically present at the title office. You had to bring a certified check, and you would meet the seller in person and hand them this check. Well, we've made this more convenient now because most of this can be done electronically. You can wire funds electronically. You can negotiate and handle all these terms over email. So it's incredibly convenient. Now we can do real estate closings from the golf course. However, we've introduced this tremendous security problem where now wire fraud and especially in these real estate transactions has become very prevalent. People are able to monitor email and determine when someone's about to do a closing, insert some fraudulent wire instructions, and now the buyer has just wired their money to someone where they can't recover it and lost a huge heap of money. So, security and convenience have kind of been offset here. Another example that most people understand is just things like locks on doors. If I left the doors to my home unlocked, it'd be very convenient for me. I wouldn't have to worry about remembering keys. When I'm bringing in groceries, I'm not fumbling around trying to unlock the door. Very convenient. However, it's also very insecure. Anyone can walk into my house at any time and I'm not there. And so we see that when people tend to invest in these IoT devices, one of these sensors, we're optimizing on the efficiency and the convenience aspect and not really thinking of the security aspect. And it's sort of interesting because if you pose someone the question of, well, leaving your doors unlocked would also make this very convenient. Is that something you're comfortable with? Most people would say no. And so when you think about how much convenience I'm actually saving myself, from a household device standpoint, is it that much of a problem for me to get up and walk to the thermostat to adjust the temperature, or can I do it from the couch on my phone? When you think about introducing security problems, maybe getting up and changing the temperature is not that big of a deal. So that's one good way to look at when acquiring these devices or when discussing them, is always be weighing those security trade-offs and realizing, yes, I realize there are some efficiency and convenience gains to be made. However, am I weighing the security implications of this? Because those tend to almost always be inversely proportional. Am I making the right balance here in this decision? So what is the problem? We have these devices everywhere. They introduce some security problems clearly and at the cost of convenience, but what is kind of the overarching problem here? The number one thing, I touched on earlier, is really the increase of what we call the attack surface. So you have more doors, more entry points, more things to secure. Going back to kind of the history of data security, you used to have to protect a single file in a single filing cabinet. Now you're protecting all these different ways for devices to get access to your data, network computers, and these IoT devices. Another way to think of it is that, again, because we view IoT devices traditionally a little bit differently from a, quote, traditional computer or workstation, you would be really reluctant to overnight double the number of workstations on your network. People saying, well, what about patching and training and security of all these devices? That would be a tremendous IT investment and resources. But you see people do effectively the same thing with IoT devices because they don't treat them the same. And so you're effectively doubling or drastically increasing the number of connected devices on your network through IoT. The other part that is very scary and concerning about this is that many of these devices tend to live in very critical industries. From a cybersecurity standpoint, and in our business, we tend to focus primarily on PII, right, personally identifiable information, and the threat of having someone's identity stolen through Social Security numbers, dates of birth, things like that. for many of these IoT devices, they're in industries where these might be deployed in a nuclear reactor, chemical plant, medical devices, including embedded medical devices like pacemakers. And an exploitation of that is drastically more severe than one of having your identity stolen. The other unique thing about many of those types of industries is that they don't tend to be as, quote, computer heavy as a traditional office. So you think of an office with a bunch of desks, and everybody's got a workstation they're sitting and typing on all day. Many of these, manufacturing and other industrial type plants don't have the same layout. So they may not have as much of an investment in computer network infrastructure. And so in addition to having a huge plethora of these devices, and in the fact that they are in a very critical industry, they may not have the same levels of investment that some of the traditional offices would in terms of network security. So all of those can lead to a pretty severe problem of these IoT devices that have access to sensitive data or sensitive areas of our industry and may not have the same levels of maturity or at least as much practice doing this as some of our traditional office spaces do. So lastly, we want to think about, so what can we do about any of this? So this obviously sounds kind of bad. What are some of the steps that we can do when considering either deploying these or I've got these deployed? What can I do to kind of wrap my arms around this and make sure that I'm treating it correctly? So number one is just knowing what you have. So this is just a typical inventory. There are automated tools, some freely available, some paid, that you can use to effectively do a scan of your network to understand what is actually out there, what's deployed, who's got access to this, and knowing what you have to say, okay, maybe we do have these, maybe we don't. But certainly just having an inventory to start with to know how big is the problem or how many, quote, doors do I have that someone can potentially enter into. The next thing that we always focus on is really risk assessments. This can be a very, formulated and, a very formal process with a well-defined methodology. It can also be very informal, but it really boils down to what is the sensitive data, right? What are my assets that I care about protecting? What are the threats against those assets? So we're looking at things like, how can people get in? How can they exploit these? And lastly what are the security controls or protections that I have in place that I can use to prevent access to that data or to reduce the likelihood of those threats occurring? So again, some of these are very well-defined, services that you can buy and use to find risk assessment methodologies, or it can be as simple as picking through it and keeping it on a spreadsheet. But what it boils down to is, where is the sensitive data, or where are the things that I want to protect? Do I have IoT devices that can access that data? Do they need access to it? If those were to get exploited, or if they had vulnerabilities in them, what is the problem there, and what protections do I have in place to either prevent that from occurring or to mitigate the effects of that occurring? Risk assessment is really important just to make sure that, with limited resources, whether they be financial or time, what is the best way for me to use these to get the most bang for my buck in protecting my network? When deploying these devices or considering deploying them, obviously network segmentation and segregation is very important. We want to make sure that if we do know, what we know about these devices is that sometimes they're harder to patch, they have some vulnerabilities potentially, may not be on our typical operating system. And so let's treat them as a bit of a risk. Can we put them in a network segmentation, and can we segregate them out so that in the event that they are exploited, are we able to prevent someone from jumping from that device into more sensitive areas of our network? So what we've seen in a lot of places is that when you have things particularly that are sensors and are mainly just feeding data somewhere, is to really, really restrict the access that those devices have and limit it down to, this is the only thing that they should be doing, this is the only area they should be talking to, and explicitly restricting that access down so that in the event those things are compromised, it's very, very limited what they can do. Another key thing that's a pretty easy and free thing to manage is password management. Always, always, always change default passwords on these devices. Pretty much all of them ship with a default password that is known to everyone. It's usually some variation of admin password, something like that. And if a very easy exploit that people will run is searching for these devices on the internet, and just using a handful of default credentials that can potentially exploit your network with very, very little work. So an easy thing to do is once you get these things, make sure that you change the default passwords, and many of them have some kind of administrative access, and we recommend disabling or strictly restricting who has access to those administrative portals, because that's another common exploit point we see as well. Kind of going hand in hand with that is securely configuring these devices. All of these devices are shipped to be very easy to get started, very easy to install and start. Again, they're designed for efficiency and convenience. So they make them very easy to get started, very easy to set up. The trade-off with that is that they tend to ship in a very insecure fashion because they are very easy to set up. So great once you get them set up, but really important to follow up afterwards and make sure that you lock these things down. You're restricting administrative access. You're restricting it based on what does this device actually need to do? What does it need to talk to? Another good way, kind of similar to inventory, is to invest in some pen testing. It's something you can either do internally if you have the resources or find a vendor to do this for you, but have them actually testing your network, both externally, so outside of your network, as well as internally, simulating someone who's able to breach your perimeter and trying to identify those devices. We do internal pen testing at TraceSecurity. We have many, many, many successful exploits that are based off of printers. When we do these internal pen tests, one of the first things that people look for, because most of them, like other IoT devices, ship with some default credentials and have administrative access portals that are open. And so once someone is in that network, it's an easy, quick thing for them to find it and score a quick pen test win. So again, pen testing is a good way to identify where your weaknesses are and address some of those. Obviously, you want to have an incident response plan. This goes hand in hand with things you're doing already, but including the fact that this is an added potential exploit point. Do you have incident response plan in place to address any problems that may occur? Can you recover if an event does occur? And lastly, when you do acquire these products, or if you do, truly partner with the vendor, and so you can work with them to stay up to date on updates, security patches. Again, depending what kind of devices you're buying and what their use case is, it's going to be highly dependent on your vendor, but you want to make sure that you have a good working relationship with them and understand how they communicate security vulnerabilities, how they patch them, how often their patch cadences, how they deliver those. And you want to maintain those lines of communication, make sure that you are notified, because many times we see exploits based off of known vulnerabilities that went unpatched. We've seen, and this was news a while back, but target breach was allegedly done through HVAC systems. These were other, IoT or embedded systems that were kind of managed by a third party, but were probably not viewed as traditional quote computers because they were HVAC. I actually read this morning on a similar topic that, there are these existing IoT botnets. So these bad guys have gone and compromised big swaths of these botnets and can use them for distributed denial of service attacks. And I guess kind of funny, someone was able to compromise other bad guys' botnets by guessing their passwords. So many of them had used some default or easy to guess passwords. And so another bad guy had compromised many other bad guys' botnets, all based on basically weak default passwords. Another kind of major IoT breach recently that was, again, based on default passwords was the Mirai botnet, which is a pretty large distributed denial of service attack that took down pretty big chunks of the internet for part of a day. And that was all based on someone doing what's called a Google dorking, but it's basically a way to kind of hack Google to identify these IoT devices that are publicly exposed, collecting that list, and then running what is really a pretty small set of default credentials to just identify which ones allow, allowed access based on default credentials. And through compromising, that set was able to have this very sizable botnet that was able to have a tremendous impact on the internet at large. So, again, I really can't emphasize enough for these things is, when deploying these things, have a plan, think about treating them like devices, make sure you do some of those security basics like securing the configuration, changing those passwords, and thinking about, from a risk perspective, what are the sensitive things that I'm protecting? How do these IoT devices have access to it? And how can I drastically, restrict that access to the bare minimum? And in the event these things are compromised, how can I really reduce the impact of that occurring? So some things to think about when either when applying or if you've got these things already out on your network, to go get that inventory and then do all those things, following up to make sure, have we changed passwords and have we really restricted access everywhere. So if that was helpful, open for any questions that are out there.
That was great. Thank you so much, Ryan, for that presentation. Now is question time. So if everyone wants to start submitting your questions in the Q&A box to the left-hand side of your screen. Ryan, your audio was coming over a little bit muffled towards the end of the presentation. So if you can go a bit closer to the mic, or if you are on hands-free and can pick up the phone, that might be a good idea.
Okay, I'm on my phone, so I haven't changed, so maybe my position changed, so I'll try a little bit better here.
Okay, sounds good. That's perfect. Okay, so yeah, please submit your questions, guys. And just a reminder to make sure you download all of the assets from the digital gift bag. There's some great stuff in there from TraceSecurity, as well as the slides for this presentation. So some really, really cool things. Let's get started with the questions then. So first up, Doreen asks, any quick and easy tips to identify or prevent issues with IoT devices?
Sure. I mentioned it, but you can do a search for how to, it's called Google Dork, D-O-R-K. You can do a search for how to kind of Google Dork yourself. And so you will look at either your publicly accessible URL or publicly accessible IP address space. And so you can run these searches to say, show me any devices that are exposed publicly or externally that look like IoT devices. So this will find things like web cameras, printers, home assistant, those kinds of things. And so if you have those out there, obviously you want to, if they're publicly exposed, make sure they're very locked down. You have a good reason. Otherwise, remove that public access. And then, again, I think most people what we want to do is try and not be the slowest gazelle in the pack. And so if you can change those default passwords and restrict some of the admin access, you're going to make yourself a very unattractive target, because these guys are going for volume. And so they're going to move past your device and look for another one for someone who has not changed their default password. So some of those basics will leave you off of being, the very low-hanging fruit that most of these botnet people are trying to harvest.
Yeah, totally. Makes complete sense. A question that's come in from Uluwasi, and I hope I got that name right. He asks, how best can the users of IoT devices be educated to practice these policies that you've mentioned?
I think from an IT management standpoint, it's going to come down to a big amount of policies and procedures and training those staff to view these things as actual computing devices. A lot of times these things fall into, what's called kind of shadow IT. So maybe you have other units within your business that are bringing them in without IT supervision. And so things like, having active inventory and active management of your network to know when new things are plugged in and to identify them. For the actual users and consumers, that tends to be focused exclusively on the education component. So if you can't control, if it's not on let me control the inbound access and at the network level, but I want to address sort of user education, we recommend, and again, this is part of where IoT is kind of the same as what you're already doing, is we're recommending a very robust security awareness program. And so part of that is going to be obviously on, phishing and visitors and letting people in your building, but to include in things about IoT and realizing that, all of these devices are also exploitable, and to think about them in the same way and to realize that, it'd be nice if I brought my Google Home Assistant into the office and plugged it in to make dictating my emails easier, realizing that is a tremendous security threat that you're presenting, and keeping them aware of that same fact that these things are computers. They do introduce vulnerabilities, and to think of them that way.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, I can just imagine, you wouldn't even think about that, and all the wearables and everything like that play a part. A question that's probably a little bit related to that is, how do you disable and restrict admin?
That's going to be highly dependent on the vendor of the device. So, this is, again, part of that, having that vendor relationship. So, some of them is, an example that I didn't mention is, routers. So like home routers, or maybe you have little wireless routers throughout the office that help extend signal. Many of those ship with a default administrative portal that is enabled on, maybe some kind of unusual port with basic credentials. So for those things, sometimes it's as easy as going in and flipping a switch to say disable the administrative access here. Sometimes it's actually maybe at the network layer to say if I can't disable, network remote access from this thing, I just have to disable access to these ports at the network level. So hard to say at a broad level, how do you disable admin access on all of these devices, as much as it's going to be very much dependent on the actual device you have.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, makes complete sense. So yeah, check with your provider, and hopefully that will help. Another question that's come in from Robin, and Robin asks, what type of pen testing, or should it be rotated through the options?
I think what type is really going to depend on how quickly your team, and the business wants to move to address things. So you could potentially do, for example, start with a, external pen test, which is going to be kind of probably a good place to start because that's what the majority of attackers are going to be looking at. And it's going to be highly dependent on, how big your public exposure is and how many things you find. And so if you have a very large IP space, and let's say you find a large chunk of, or, a handful of vulnerabilities, at that point, you're going to want to address those things. And so, these things aren't done in a vacuum. So maybe you've got some services that are exposed that you have vendors or people relying on, and you can't just upgrade them overnight, and you have to go through a change control process and testing. And so if those things are taking a long time, it's not really valuable to go and do additional testing because you haven't addressed those things that you've already identified first. We do recommend doing some mix of internal and external. Again, how often you want to rotate them is going to be dependent on how quickly you're looking to move to patch those things. It's very demoralizing to go get these pen tests done and to dump a bunch of results on someone and just feel totally overwhelmed without an ability to actually respond to them. But we definitely do recommend balancing internal and external to get that look of, okay, external is going to be purely, bad guy from the outside trying to get in. We also recommend on external swapping out what we call a black box and white box. So a black box is going to be just come at me, I don't know where you're coming from, and see what you can uncover. White box is if you have some kind of like IDS, IPS, or firewalling externally to allow the pen tester to actually get past that first layer and start interacting with the second layer. So you kind of get a look at, okay, what does it look like shields up, shields down on pen testing? And then from an internal perspective is you assume, okay, if someone has broken through my perimeter, either through, network-based exploit or they've gained physical access to my location and they've plugged into the network socket, what are my vulnerabilities now that someone is inside, and have I done sufficiently enough to protect myself from an internal perspective as well?
Yeah. Okay, understand. Another question that's come in asks, how do you handle it when vendors are not providing patches?
Very problematic. So, depending how much you're spending with them, you can always, threaten to switch vendors and hope they address it. I do feel like there has been a shift recently and particularly in B2B, that security is a very, very important thing in B2B sales particularly. I don't know about the home consumer is really optimizing on convenience. So I do feel like most of those vendors are at least aware of the fact that security is a problem. I think it's an important thing to address up front with them when you're conducting due diligence with them, is to find out what is your, how do you guys release vulnerabilities? How often are you updating patches? How do we update those things? To really understand how much security is at a forefront for them. And understanding those kinds of things will help give you a picture into how seriously they take security. Are they able to provide me these things? And even if you have these devices and they are not providing patches, you're really going to have to focus on protecting yourself internally. So assuming, okay, these things are going to be exploitable, I can't get a patch for them, how can I drastically reduce their access and really kind of put them in some sort of a DMZ, segment them on the network so that in the event these are exploited, it's very, very minimal damage that they can do.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm just going to take two more questions. So the first one comes from Michael. Michael asks, what impact do you expect GDPR to have on current US compliance laws? So is there anything related to that kind of data that you're seeing that might be an issue?
Yeah. I expect it to definitely have an impact on US compliance laws. I feel like everyone knows that, protecting consumer data is going to be at the, it's already in discussions. I believe that Texas, California, Illinois may have one on the book. So several states have already drafted some legislation that looks very, very similar to GDPR and the EDU. So I believe that there is something very near on the horizon. And this will be, much of the way it was for people when GDPR came out who had to interact with countries in the EU. It's going to be a major effort to go through and understand, where your data is, how you're securing it, how you share it, who has access to it, making sure that all of the consumers whose data you possess are informed, have given you consent of how you're using it and who you share it with. So pretty significant effort. And really, these IoT devices, I think, will be highly impacted because most folks think of them, again, as in terms of convenience, and this is a nice way for me to change my thermostat or to listen to music in the kitchen. But they're also collecting tons of information about us. I know there's all these kind of rumors about Alexa listening to you when it's not on, or listening to conversations. I have no idea how true that is, but all of that's going to have to be provided to the consumer, and so that's going to be a tremendous effort and a tremendous change for these devices because a huge part of their value is data collection to use that for building other tools. So it's going to be a major impact for those folks.
Yeah, no, I can't even imagine. It'll be really interesting to see how it plays out. The next question, the last question that we'll take is from Farhan. Farhan asks, is there any certification available for security in IoTs? Do you know?
I am not, I can't say offhand whether there is. I don't know about any IoT specific security certifications. Again, from kind of my slide on how this is all the same, it is just kind of like computers. And so things like, certified ethical hacker and some of those, networking and security certifications certainly lend themselves very well to the same kinds of things that you need to think of when addressing IoT, right? So how does this work on a network? What data does it access? Ports, protocols, those things are all very important. But I'm not familiar with an IoT-specific certification.
Yeah, okay, no problem. Cool, so maybe that's something we can look out for before the next conference that might have been developed by that time. Sure. And I'll just do one last question. One last question has just come in. That is, are home devices like Alexa and Google Home always listening, and how can you avoid that?
Like I said, there are rumors. I believe. So the answer is, as long as they're on, yes, they're always listening because, as far as I know, I don't use any of either of these devices, but they're always listening for a kind of trigger command to get its attention to then tell it to do something. So in that regard, yes, they're always listening. How can you avoid that? As far as I know, the best way is to unplug it or not have them. Shy of that, again, it's going to be very vendor dependent. Can you mute these things? I saw someone had an interesting project where they developed yet another smart device that emitted a kind of white noise that muffled all these other home devices from hearing anything. And that device had a very specific command that would then stop making the noise so you could talk to other devices. So they've solved the problem with yet another IoT device, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, or you can do what you see in the movies and make sure you have all of your important conversations in the shower with the water running.
That's very good as well.
Sadly, that's all we've got time for. So I want to thank Ryan again for delivering the presentation and giving up his time to put that together. Really insightful stuff and really, really useful. As I said, download your resources from the digital gift bag. And also, if you have a chance to fill in the survey questions, we would love to get your feedback and improve the content each time we do this conference. So I'm just going to recap today before I let you go. So first up, we heard from David Masson at Darktrace on adapting to fight back, how cyber AI neutralizes never-before-seen threats. Following that, we looked at true security partnerships, speaking the language of business and technology with Philip Miller, CISO and head of infrastructure for Brooks Brothers. Next, we looked at how to create a people-centric cybersecurity strategy with Ryan Castle, Senior Vice President for Cybersecurity at Proofpoint. And we rounded up the day with another Ryan, the Insecurity of Things, why IoT is a threat you can't ignore. If you missed any of these sessions, they are available on demand for a limited time only. And you can log in with the link you've already received in the emails that we've been sending today, or we'll also send a second on-demand email with those same links. Tomorrow, we've got an equally exciting lineup for you with 5 sessions. So starting at 9:30 Eastern Standard Time, that's 2:30 British Summer Time, we have 5 secrets to awareness success, how to make your security awareness programs year-round. And that's with Perry Carpenter. He's the Chief Evangelist and Strategy Officer for KnowBe4. If you join that session live, you are eligible to win a $150 Amazon gift card. I wish I was eligible to win that. Straight after that, at 10:30 Eastern Standard Time, that's 3:30 UK time, we've got a really cool panel discussion on dynamic risk management for the evolving threat landscape. And that has 4 different speakers on. Harry Purfer, the cybersecurity engineer for NIST, is our moderator. And he's joined by representatives from the Bank of Canada, the state of Kentucky, and Virgin Mobile. Following that panel at 12 noon, we have a presentation on threat intelligence accessing the next era of security. And that's with Dennis Lieber, the CISO for Cabinet of Health and Family Services, state of Kentucky. And then we're rounding up the day with 2 more sessions, 2 o'clock, achieve real-time visibility and control of your hybrid cloud with Tim Woods, fireman. And finally, at 3 o'clock, securing the workforce, building, maintaining, and measuring an effective security awareness program to drive a company-wide responsibility for security. And that's with Chris Budd, Vice President for Americas with Deutsche Bank. So really, really interesting program tomorrow. So definitely dial in and listen in for that. So thank you again to Ryan, and I will see everyone else back here at 9:30 Eastern Standard Time. Thank you.
All right, thank you.